Welcome back. This is lesson number 2, and we are covering preparing the skull for staining. This is a very important step as it kind of lays the base, the groundwork for the rest of the process. Many times you're going to be getting skulls from kind of all over the place. You may purchase something off of eBay, you may get a raw skull yourself and clean it. A friend may give you a skull. So there's going to be a wide variety or variance of conditions of those skulls. So pretty much any skull that I get goes through the same process. I'm going to macerate it, even if it appears clean. I'm going to put it in a bucket of water, see what happens, see if there's any remaining tissue on the skull, possibly grease in the skull as well. I'm going to degrease it, which is just warm water and dish soap. And then thirdly, I'm going to whiten it with hydrogen peroxide. I'm not using the high concentrate that you'll sometimes see. I simply use the 3% you can buy at the store. You don't really need a higher percentage than that if the skull is cleaned correctly. So the point is to kind of get all your skulls to the same level of cleanliness. That way the end result is more uniform because you're starting with a more uniform beginning. If you start out with a skull that's greasy, dirty, not white, then that's going to change the end result of how you stain those skulls. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. First, you're going to want to make sure that your skull is free from dirt and dust. This can affect, again, how it stains, how the stain soaks into the bone, and then just the overall color. What you're simply going to do is soak the skull in warm, soapy water. You may need to do this several times over a period of time in order to get all that dirt out of the bone, but just be patient, it will help. Secondly, you are going to want to make sure that there is no tissue on the skull. This may seem obvious, but I get a lot of skulls in where people have boiled the skull or cleaned it, and it's hard to tell that there is actually just a thin layer of tissue on that skull. So again, this goes back to the maceration process where I'm going to stick that skull in a pail of water, and if there is tissue on the bone, it will rehydrate and I'll be able to see that. If there is tissue on the bone, simply go through the maceration process. Thirdly, if there is any grease in the bone, this is going to greatly affect how the stain soaks into, penetrates into the bone. Even with a surface stain, the stain is not going to adhere to the skull correctly. In this example, I was putting on a leather stain and you can see it just was not penetrating into the bone, and I could even just wipe it off with my finger. To degrease a skull, you are going to put the skull in hot, soapy water for a period of time until all that grease comes out. Simply use a dish soap, something like a Dawn dish soap. Number 4, you are going to want to make sure there's no glue on the skull. This can kind of catch you off guard if you get a skull, it looks really nice and clean, but maybe the teeth have been glued in. If you stain that skull, especially with a penetrating stain, it will show up around the teeth where the stain may not penetrate into the bone, and you'll get a noticeable discoloration in the bone. Generally, what you're going to see is either Elmer's glue, a hot glue gun glue, or super glue. With Elmer's glue, all you have to do is simply soak that skull overnight in water. The Elmer's glue will turn white, and you can just take like a toothbrush and brush it off. That's really no big deal at all. Super glue, you're going to soak the skull in acetone. So put it in a container, soak it in acetone. Again, it may need to be overnight or a few days. Just use extreme caution with acetone, just a side note, as it is very flammable. And the acetone will dissolve that clear coat. It is also very common to see hot gun glue on the skull. Generally, you're going to see it where they will glue the mandible together in the center, or they will glue the mandible to the cranium at the back here. Now, there's a lot of different solutions to get hot gun glue off of the skull, but I have found that simply soaking the skull in water, warm water, overnight actually works really well. Now, it's not going to do anything to the glue itself, but what it will do is it will take the connection of the glue to the skull and weaken that. So you can simply take it out of the water the next morning and peel off that glue because the connection of the glue to the skull has weakened. Alrighty, so you've got a perfectly clean skull. There's no grease, there's no dirt, there's no glue, there's no clear coat on it, just a nice clean skull. But what about the teeth? Well, the teeth are not actually a huge problem either. You can stain the skull with the teeth in If you would like, and again, it just depends on the look you're going for, some stains will stain the teeth more than others. For example, something like a walnut stain or a berry stain can stain the teeth. Now there's kind of two options if you do not want to stain the teeth. The first option is to coat the teeth in a layer of super glue. Now this is actually going to do two things. First off, it's going to prevent the teeth from staining, and then secondly, it is going to actually protect those teeth from cracking. Now, cracking teeth can be a result of the changes of humidity. So if you purchase a skull from, say, out west and you're on the East Coast, just shipping it from the west to the East Coast will be a change in humidity, and that change in humidity can cause those teeth to crack. So by having that layer of super glue on the teeth, you're not only preventing it from staining, but you're also protecting it from cracking. The second option, when possible, is to simply remove the teeth. You can do this with a lot of smaller animals. If you just take the skull, put it in warm water overnight, that'll help soften up the bone, and then those teeth will simply come out, and then you can proceed to stain the skull.